My name is Sarah. I'm 39. And from the outside, my life looks like a dream come true. A beautiful home in the suburbs of Chicago. A husband, John. A successful lawyer. And a level of stability that others envy. But on the inside, things are different. Our marriage, once vibrant and full of passion, now feels like a list of daily tasks. John leaves early, comes home late, and between his phone calls, meetings, and court sessions, all that's left for me is emptiness. I've grown used to this silence. Even its echo has become familiar. But recently something has changed. Loneliness has stopped being just melancholy. It's become a constant companion, growing stronger each day. Recently, Nick, John's son from his first marriage, moved in with us. He's 26, just graduated from university, and is looking for work in the city. Nick is different from his father. He's younger, more energetic, with a charm that sometimes makes me smile. Even on the dullest days, I tried to see him simply as part of the family. I helped him settle in, made him breakfast, asked about his plans for the day. But one day, I found myself realizing that his presence strangely filled the emptiness I'd been ignoring for so long. That evening, which I can't seem to forget, began like any other. John was working late. As usual, the house was quiet, only the soft glow of lamps filling the rooms with a cozy warmth. I decided to change for bed, when suddenly, the bedroom door quietly opened. "Oh, sorry," Nick said quickly, closing the door. I had turned around, caught off guard. In that moment, I felt not only embarrassed but also somehow noticed. His gaze, embarrassed but warm, reminded me of something I used to feel. I quickly pulled on a robe and said, "It's all right, Nick. Did you need something? I just wanted to check if you needed anything from the store." He replied, looking down. We stood there in awkward silence. It was a moment that lasted only a few seconds but left a deep impression. Nick looked as though he wanted to say something else but just mumbled, "Then I'll go." When the door closed, I was left alone, staring at my reflection in the mirror. For the first time in a long while, I felt something strange, a spark of life. I didn't know what exactly had moved me, his kindness, his honesty, or just the simple fact that someone had paid attention to me. That night marked the beginning of a new awareness. Inside me, something took root that I couldn't name. The next day, I tried to behave as usual, but our glances crossed in the kitchen. "Talk between us. How did you sleep?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "Not bad. And you?" "Great. This place is surprisingly cozy," he said with a gentle smile. I just nodded, feeling his words warm me more than I wanted. Throughout the day, I couldn't get his face, his smile, his voice out of my head. Something in me, something that had been dormant for so long, began to wake up. I didn't know where it would lead, but I knew one thing. Nick had become an important part of my day, even if I tried to convince myself otherwise. At that point, I didn't yet realize that the small crack in my familiar life had already begun to turn into a chasm. The next day seemed ordinary. The morning started with the smell of freshly brewed coffee drifting from the kitchen. I went downstairs to make myself some toast, but was surprised to see Nick already busy at the stove. He turned when he heard my footsteps and greeted me with a smile that made me feel warm inside. "Good morning, Sarah. Would you like an omelet?" "I thought I'd practice a bit," he said, flipping vegetables in the pan with a spatula. I couldn't help but smile. This young man was nothing like John. John never had time for small things or spontaneity. Nick was like a breath of fresh air. "I'm sure your omelet is better than mine," I joked, sitting at the table. "Doubt it." He laughed, setting a plate in front of me. We ate and talked. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was talking to someone who really listened. Nick shared stories about his university days, his friends, and his dreams. He spoke about wanting to find work in design, and I was amazed by his enthusiasm. "You know, sometimes it feels like you're much wiser than your age," I remarked, taking a sip of coffee. "And you?" He paused, as if choosing his words. "Seem much younger than yours." I felt a slight blush on my cheeks. It was strange to hear such a compliment. But I couldn't deny that it was pleasant. The whole day after our conversation, I couldn't concentrate. Every word Nick had said, his voice, his way of speaking, all of it lingered with me. I tried to brush it off, but my thoughts kept returning to him. Later, when the house was quiet again, I heard him in the garden. He was out back working on an old chair he'd found in the garage. I went out onto the porch, watching as he enthusiastically sanded the wood. "What are you doing?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Thought I'd give this old chair a second chance," he replied, wiping his hands with a cloth. His answer made me smile. It was a metaphor he probably didn't even realize. "Looks like you've got a knack for this. Maybe you'll open your own workshop if design doesn't work out," I joked. He laughed. His laughter was so genuine and contagious that I couldn't help but laugh along. "And what about you, Sarah?" he suddenly asked, looking straight into my eyes. "Is there something you've always wanted to do but never dared to?" His question caught me off guard. For a moment I froze, considering my answer. A whirlwind of thoughts raced through my mind. Travel, a fresh start, even just freedom from the constant routine. "You know, Nick," I began slowly, "I've always wanted to write a book. I never found the time or the courage." "Then you should start right now," he said enthusiastically. "Life's too short to put off dreams." His words struck a chord. I couldn't remember the last time someone had inspired me like that. This day was a turning point. I started to see Nick differently, not just as a stepson or a young man, but as someone who brought light into my gray days. With him, I felt alive again, as if I were discovering new possibilities. When the evening settled over the house, I returned to my bedroom, but his voice echoed in my head. Life's too short to put off dreams. And although I didn't yet know where this would lead, I knew one thing. That day left a mark that couldn't be erased. The evening was unusually quiet. John was working late again, and I had long since stopped being surprised. I was sitting on the couch with a book, but the pages couldn't hold my attention. My thoughts kept drifting back to earlier in the day, when Nick had suggested a walk in the nearby park. "Why not?" I had said, though a voice inside warned me it might not be the best idea. The walk was pleasant. Leaves crunched underfoot and the air smelled fresh. Nick was relaxed, joking, sharing memories of visiting this park as a child when he'd come here with John. But behind the light-hearted conversation, there was something else. A feeling as if a thin bridge had been laid between us, one that might soon crumble or become something more. And now I sat in the silence of the house, looking out the window at the street, bathed in lamplight, trying to make sense of my feelings. Of course, I opened my book to a random page, only to hear the front door open and footsteps in the hallway. "Sarah?" Nick peeked into the living room. "I thought you'd be asleep by now." "No, I can't sleep," I admitted. Then, "Would you like some company? I just came in from outside. The air was so fresh." I nodded, and he sat down in the chair across from me. We sat in silence, basking in the calm, but the tension I'd been trying to ignore settled in the air again. "Today was a good day," he started. He nodded. "Thanks for the walk." "No thank you. I haven't had such a carefree stroll in a while." He smiled and his gaze lingered on me a little longer than usual. "You know, Sarah." He began, then hesitated as if searching for the right words. "What?" I asked, feeling my heartbeat quicken. Sometimes I feel like we're on the same wavelength. It's strange given the age difference, but it's like you understand me. I lowered my gaze, feeling the blush rise to my cheeks again. "Nick," I began, but he suddenly got up from the chair and stepped closer. "I'm sorry if I'm crossing a line, but I can't keep this inside anymore. You mean something to me, more than you should." His words took me by surprise. I didn't know what to say, because everything he'd said was true for me as well. That moment, I wasn't thinking about consequences, about John, or about how wrong this all was. I just sat there looking at him, unable to move. He leaned closer, and I felt him hesitate, giving me a chance to pull away. But I didn't. When our lips met, everything around us seemed to fade away. It was a gentle, cautious kiss, filled with both doubt and desire. But just as I began to respond, reality came crashing back. I pulled away, standing up from the couch. "This isn't right, Nick," I said, though my voice sounded weaker than I'd intended. "But you felt it too, didn't you?" he asked, a mix of confidence and hope in his voice. I don't know," I replied, my words catching in my throat. I couldn't look at him, and he didn't move. This was a moment that divided everything into before and after. I didn't know what to do next, but I knew one thing. We had crossed a line, and there was no turning back. "I need some time," I said, heading toward the stairs. He didn't stop me, but his gaze, filled with emotion, followed me all the way to the bedroom. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it, feeling my hands tremble slightly. Inside, a storm was raging. Guilt, fear, and yet something new. Something I couldn't deny. This night marked another step toward something I could no longer ignore. Morning came too quickly, and I felt as though I hadn't slept at all. Memories of last night's kiss haunted me, refusing to let me rest. I had hoped the morning would bring clarity, but instead, everything felt even more complicated. The entire house seemed to hum with tension. I went down to the kitchen, where Nick was already sitting with a cup of coffee. His expression was calm, but his eyes were clouded with deep contemplation. "Good morning," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Good morning," he replied, taking a sip. We sat in silence, broken only by the soft sound of raindrops on the window. I wanted to say something, to explain myself, but every word I thought of felt wrong. "Sarah," he finally spoke, "I know you feel guilty." I looked at him and he continued, "I feel it too, but we can't deny what happened. I can't pretend it didn't mean anything." "Nick," I said, steadying myself, This can't go on. It's wrong." He pressed his lips together and looked down. "Did you feel something too? Or was it just in my head?" I froze. He was right, but admitting that meant opening a door I was desperately trying to close. "It doesn't matter, Nick," I said, though the words felt heavy. "We have to think about John, about what's right." Nick was silent, but his eyes said more than words ever could. In that moment, I understood just how sincere he was, but I also knew that sincerity could destroy everything. The day dragged on endlessly. John came home earlier than usual, in high spirits. He hugged me in the hallway and suggested we have dinner together as a family. I nodded, feeling as though I was being pulled between two worlds, each tugging me in a different direction. At dinner, John spoke about his work successes, and I tried to look attentive. Nick, on the other hand, was almost silent. I noticed how he kept glancing at me, but I couldn't bring myself to meet his eyes. After dinner, John settled in front of the television, and I retreated to the bedroom under the pretense of being tired. But as soon as I closed the door, I heard a quiet knock. "Sarah." "It's me," Nick whispered. I opened the door and he slipped in, closing it behind him. "We need to talk," he said quietly but firmly. "Nick, you shouldn't be here," I replied, feeling my heart pounding in my chest. "I can't stay silent anymore." He stepped closer. "I want to know how you really feel." I closed my eyes, struggling to gather my thoughts. "It doesn't matter, Nick," I repeated, but my voice sounded weaker. "We can't do this." "Then tell me honestly," he said, his voice trembling. "If you tell me you feel nothing, I'll leave and never bring it up again." I froze. Telling him I felt nothing would be a lie, but the truth could destroy everything. "Nick," I began, but at that moment, John's voice called from the living room. "Sarah, are you all right?" My heart skipped a beat. "Yes, everything's fine," I called back, trying to sound calm. Nick took a step back, his gaze filled with unspoken emotions. "I'll go," he said quietly, "but remember, I'm not here to ruin your life. I just wanted to be honest." When he left, I closed the door and leaned against it. I felt trapped between desire and duty. The next morning, I found a note on the kitchen table. "Sarah, I don't want to complicate your life. I'll leave for a while to think things over. But if you ever feel like you want something more, I'll be waiting. Nick, asterisk." Asterisk. These words brought tears to my eyes. This might have been the end, but it wasn't the conclusion of the story. Ahead of me was a choice that I had yet to make.